JOVA. The JOVA Podcast.
What's up, JOVA family, and welcome to another season. Season 3, baby. It's been an amazing 3 years. When we started this, I was all alone. And today, the family is growing. You understand? So I'm very privileged. Season 3, welcome. My name is Nkosie Hospice, your friendly neighborhood vocal arranger. And with me is always my boy Brian behind the camera. And today we have my brother Fez is also with me behind the camera. And today's a special one. Today's a special one because we dive into the mind and the soul of the legendary Dr. Kgomotso Moshugi. Welcome, sir. Thank you very much for indulging me. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. This has been a long time coming. I think the first time we had a bit of a chat. I think it was at the Legato concert, and it was outside. I think I caught you and I was with my phone, and we were just, shooting some impromptu stuff, and something that was supposed to be like a 30-second insert turned into like a 3-minute deep dive into legacy and stuff like that. So we're like, no, man, we definitely need to schedule some time and have a chat. But I think this has also been generally a long time coming. And I'm extremely honored that you are here on this platform with us, man. Appreciate you so much. So how are you doing? Happy New Year. Happy New Year as well to everyone at home. Happy New Year, guys. Happy New Year. How are things? How are you doing, man?
No, I'm good. I'm glad to be here on your platform. Also, I love the work that you do overall, on and off stage. So it's good to be in a space where I can participate in some form or another to contribute or to even receive from your plate.
Hey, man. Hey. I knew that this was a thing that needed to happen at last year's AMC. Okay. That happened when? In November, right? Sometime mid-November or something like that. Towards the end of November. And we crossed paths in the loo. I was heading out of the and what, started as just us, exchanging pleasantries, built into a full-on 30, 40 conversations, 40-minute conversation in that bathroom, and a lot of gems. And man, all I can say is every time I speak to you, I always walk away from that conversation with a different perspective on so many things, and some of which we'd be able to share with everyone watching at home today. The first thing that we were even talking about this just shortly before we started was I was so interested in understanding, because all along in my life of knowing you, I've always known you as Kgomotso Moshugi. And I don't know, when was it, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
Yeah, recently,
fairly recently, when you became Dr. Kgomotso Moshugi. And I was asking you what that doctorate was for. So maybe if you could just share a bit about that. I found that quite interesting.
Yeah, well, that's always a loaded question to have to reflect on a whole thesis or what the project is about. But for me, it's also quite fascinating because I think I enjoyed working on that project. It had its own demands, but it was fascinating because I was not only looking at what I could do and how I thought about myself, but it was about studying the works of others and the community that I had for so long been practicing in, and to understand how people's journeys have led them into different paths. So in short, the title of my PhD is the transnationalization and indigenization of Euro-American hymns through the creative agency of arranging.
Okay.
And of course, I've always believed, and that's part of how I maybe put some things across in that piece of writing, that this project, could be studied from multiple disciplines. And somehow it's reflected in how multidisciplinary it became when I was engaging in it. But because I'm a musical arranger myself, it afforded me opportunities also to create or to engage beyond social sciences and humanities typical projects.
Okay.
So while it sits in that space,
Okay.
but I was able to bring creative practice also as a mode of inquiry, and partly as a complementary output at the end of the thesis itself.
Wow.
Which means that I worked with conventional tools of doing like academic research,
Okay.
but I brought in creative thinking or creative work as research.
Wow.
Basically, that's how maybe I want to explain the idea of arranging
Okay.
in the title.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I could explain this from so many angles. I must just in my mind find which angle best suits this platform.
This platform. Okay.
Yeah, but in simple terms, so that work was also about understanding that. So there's a chapter that I've written which focuses basically on the intellectual history of arranging in the Adventist space,
Okay.
which kind of takes you through where our ideas about arranging started.
Okay.
Looking at particular projects that have not only contributed to the creative life of Adventists, but also specifically tilted the trajectories. Because if you were to study everybody else who's been part of this, it's endless. So I had to be very specific and look at people who've changed the course of history in some kind of way through the work that they have done. So yeah, so basically I'm looking at hymns, but I'm looking at arranging also. It's a lot, right? Especially because once you start talking like academic research, then, you know, there's a lot of, at a certain point, there's like, you know, approaching this from particular philosophical lens and working with particular theoretical frameworks. And I like the framework that I used, which looked at creativity as a system.
Okay.
So basically in my work, I try to argue that arranging is a form of composition. And I try to argue how different types of arrangements are different types of compositions. And I show that with illustrations and so forth. But I also work with the idea of creativity as the work of a collective. Because when you think of it as a system, it means that it can't run only from one component, but it has all other components that need to come into play in order for it to manifest. And so that's how I study the Adventist environment, and that's how I study past arrangers. And so through my work, I argue for the recognition of the type of creativity that has not always been credited or been recognized as creativity, including such work as hymn translation. So I write a whole piece there about how that is creativity. And of course, when you write these things, you have to show, you have to build an argument. You know, so I kind of engage in things like that. But yeah, so it's a whole thing. It's got different sections. Some look at histories and formal decisions that were made in terms of integrating hymns, committees that set their composition, and the times in which those decisions were made, about what hymns we are meant to sing. So it's a whole work, but I think it's fascinating, and maybe on a different platform one can speak a lot more, because I think there are things there that Adventist people need to know about themselves, and maybe have a conversation about.
That's quite interesting. I think, especially with the hymn approach, it's the thing about that is that it just doesn't only encompass like Adventism, I guess, in terms of the selection of hymns, because some of those hymns are not just Adventist hymns. They're hymns that we share across with different denominations as well. With that I find quite interesting. Is it available like to be read or something like that somewhere by people?
So when you submit this to the university, it becomes like a property of the university.
Okay.
And they make it available through their like resource platform. And my institution has what they called Wired Space.
Okay.
Where they it's a repository for all the research that has been conducted in the university.
Okay.
So they make that available like that. But I don't know, I haven't heard anyone say they searched online and found it.
Okay.
Everyone else keeps telling me about the old work that I did many years ago, and some articles that are actually accessible online.
Okay. Yeah, that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
And when you're speaking about the hymns, you seem to have a particular interest in hymns. And in the long time, obviously, that I've been a consumer and appreciator of your work, I have learned that you do arrange a lot of hymns, especially, let's say, with your work with No Limits. There's been a lot of hymns that you arrange and reimagine and things like that. Is that like a particular interest of yours? Is that something that's always come easy to you? Where did that, what's the background behind that? Because I've noticed that you do quite a lot of that.
Yeah, and it's not a new thing. If you think about the trends like of group performances.
Yeah.
It goes back to the 1950s when performances were almost like formulating, and there were groups that were beginning to perform. So the hymnal is a resource. It's a very basic resource, and the way hymns are written, they are also in certain ways quite basic and pliable. So you can take a hymn in any direction. And maybe that's some of the work that comes through in my work, in my research, that the nature of arranging shifted from the 1950s all the way until today, when you just look at how the development of arranging and what we have understood as arranging. So hymns have always just been part of the repertoire of groups. I can't imagine any group historically in the Adventist circles that didn't have a hymn in its repertoire. That's because hymns are a very central part of how we practice Adventism, how we everyday experience being an Adventist. So the Adventist experience has got the hymn as a central source of cultural and artistic expression. So for that reason, then it becomes something that everyone who's an Adventist can relate to. And so if you use a hymn to make an artistic point or to kind of, create a performance of a hymn, that people will readily relate to it because, it's a hymn I know. So you work with the familiar even as you bring unfamiliarity with it. So that's one reason why I think I've been drawn to hymns, because and why I think everybody else, all other arrangers and maybe groups, have also referred to hymns. It's because they are there, they are available, but they are part of our cultural and artistic experience and sometimes identity. So in my work in particular, I have used hymns a lot because they are there. They are low-hanging fruit. The lyrics already exist and the melodies already exist. So already that is inspiration. You can look at the melody and draw inspiration that to extend that hymn into any direction. Or you can look at the lyrics and say, oh, the words of this hymn are so appealing or so strong. And that serves as inspiration to take that hymn into a dimension through your interpretation, right? So...
Wow. And that's, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking about how that kind of then formulates or shapes how you then approach those kind of arrangements. Because if there's one thing that I believe that you've done very successfully is being able to translate those hymns in a way that, even though they may be different from the way in which people may know them to be originally, but they still have their own way of appeal. But it doesn't necessarily sound the exact same. Most have, what I can say is a big kind of African influence and things like that, because I guess that's the kind of theme that maybe you'd go or you'd be using with most of the hymns. But there is something about that still feels very relatable, even though it's different. Is that something that you have to think about a bit or be intentional about when putting together the arrangements?
Yeah, I mean, that's always helpful, right? To have some form of reference and to be thinking about what the music should achieve, should accomplish, or because through your arrangement, you are creating, through music, you are creating an experience. When someone sits and listens and say, oh, wow, I enjoyed that. What have you just given them? You've just given them an experience. So when you arrange, when you create music, you're creating an experience for someone else who will sit and consume it. Sometimes also, not sometimes, it's also an experience for you creating it. It's an experience performing it. So it's a plethora of experiences integrating together depending on where you sit in the experience spectrum.
Sure.
So so you have to think about the kind of experience you want to create. Who's your audience? So that's always been a thing. And I was talking to Fezile earlier on about how also he mentioned that he read some of my old work. I was writing about the experiences of musicians, like between the church and the marketplace. It's like you're here, you're there, but you're neither here nor there. So navigating that tension. And one of it may seem like, oh, we're talking about, the challenges of how the church doesn't pay, but then you need to be paid because you're trying to do this thing professionally and you're dedicating yourself, your life to producing content that will enrich the Christian experiences for people in church. But the church doesn't know how to deal with people who dedicate themselves totally to the ministry of music. The church has not established mechanisms, and often musicians get up, and this is a topic for another day. They get up and they point fingers and say, the church doesn't. And half the time, the church doesn't know. And sometimes it's not even very interested in knowing. Because it's got its own priorities and its own agendas and focus, but it doesn't mean that we should be silent necessarily as musicians. It also means that our work needs to unfold with understanding of our context, knowing that even as we pursue and we try to shape and grow ministries or the music part of the church or of our lives in the church, we are dealing with an environment that that clearly has not always been receptive in the desired way, and there are reasons for that. Like I'm saying, that's like topic for another day. The point I'm just really trying to make is that so when you are dealing with creating creative work, like writing an arrangement or composition, the complexity of this is that we live in societies outside of church. And these societies have influence on how we think. They have influence on our experience, the experience I referred to, the musical experience, the artistic experience of audiences and music. So the people we sing to are exposed to other forms of experiences. They're experiencing other works, right? Yeah. We ourselves, as creators, we are creating with awareness of other experiences that are being created elsewhere, right? So when we have to create, we sit with tensions in ourselves. The tension is, how do you write what you need to write for an audience? Which audience? Why this choice of a piece? And then you ask yourself, are you writing to appease the audience? Or are you writing to follow the trends? So it's all a combination of things that come into play when you are creating music. And yeah, well, and you can't say that all the time your creation is exclusive or excludes any form of reference or influence.
True.
But between me and you as creators, it's just very important to check your motivations. Because when someone creates from a position of tension, I myself can hear it. You know, I don't always consider myself as a musician or musical, but I think music has been a big part of my life and a big part of how, for many years, God has required me to live out my calling.
Okay.
So music essentially has been how I have lived out what God called me to do. But I could have lived it out in a different space, and God just used music for me to do the work that needed to be done. And so I see my work as outside of music, but music just becomes a tool to achieve that, right? But having said that, I will say to you that, so when I listen to music intuitively or maybe spiritually, I hear more than music. That's why I can't attend concerts. I'm not a good concert attendant because I feel like I'm very charged, artistically and spiritually charged, that it takes a lot out of me when I sit and listen. I'm not really, people go to a concert to relax, you know. Yeah. But when I get there, if I want to relax, I'm going to switch off all things music.
Yeah.
I don't listen to music, you know. That's how I really, but when I go to these places, for instance, I hear more than music. And I'm still yet to continue figuring out and maybe formulating a clear articulation or expression of what it is that I experience. But I hear more than music. I hear the things that from which the music comes. You know how someone would say to you, and you say to someone, but I love you. And they say, no, it's in your tone. You know, it's your tone. Or you can say anything. It doesn't have to be I love you. It can be anything. And someone says, no, but the tone of your voice, dude, when I called you and I was telling you about that gig that we have to do, the way you responded, man, your tone, I didn't like your tone. Someone can say that, that's right?
True.
Because we hear what we're saying, but you can hear undertones. You can hear things that are not the message you are telling someone. So when I listen to music, I hear the things that are not the music. And sometimes that has created problems for me because sometimes it would mean that I can't sit and listen to that music comfortably. Because if there's tension in the things that created that music, not musical tension, but
spiritual, the energy. Some will say.
So then I will hear it, I will feel it, and it will unsettle me. I mean, even some of my back in the day, I don't know if I'm still a big fan of music and musicians anymore.
Okay.
But when I was growing up, I mean, there are groups and musicians that I really loved that I would sit and immerse myself in their music and enjoy. But at this point, I can't even sit a full concert really in their performances. So if I go and I listen to 1, 2, 3, 4 songs. I'm like, okay, I think I'm okay. I can't take in much more.
Yeah.
I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense, but I'm really going back to the fact that, so I've explained to you the idea. I guess now we're working with the idea of experience, right? Musical experience created and received, right? Different points of the experience. So coming back to the question you were asking about the arranging and the creation. So it becomes important, I think, and I hope that one day I can formulate, I can teach this, because it's one of my passions to teach creativity. I don't teach creativity necessarily, but I integrate it when I teach my students in the university. But it's not even so much creativity, but it's the confidence to sit with yourself and not be afraid of the person next to you, who would at that point be yourself. Right? Whatever they bring or whatever they don't bring, whatever their inadequacies, whatever their strengths, right? And that's yourself. So sitting with yourself in that manner and finding peace, and then creating from that place has different implications about your own experience as a creator. But then I always say the things we create and the things we record carry the seen and the unseen, the heard and the unheard, the obvious and the not so obvious. For instance, if you record something and you're working with just 6 and you're recording Fezile, and there's an anger, there's a challenge and the tension or whatever between you, or there's a joy between you, and you're recording. When I listen to that music, I'm not going to hear that you guys had a tension. It's not necessarily very obvious in the sound, or that you guys were experiencing a certain sense of joy. It's not in the melody per se. It's not in the harmony or whatever it is. But for someone who's very spiritually attuned, it's very possible that they can tune in and hear the things that are part of the recording, but that are not in the accentuated through the volume of the audio. Right? So what I'm saying is just taking you maybe into a space of realizing that when we are creating, we talk about God as a creator. He spoke the worlds into existence. But those existed because of God. Right? So something about them came from him or from his doing. Right? So they become as a result of him. So when you are creating an arrangement or a musical piece or whatever, whether you're performing, there are things that become as a result of you. So you can't undermine who you are and what that you brings into the creation of the experience that is going to be received on the other end.
Sure. That is quite something. I think on that note, we're speaking about knowing oneself. Who are you? I think for me, it's always something that's been a question that I've had for the longest time, just trying to understand a bit more about your background, your musical influences, and how that has contributed to, a lot of the work that we've seen, obviously, that is musical, that is what is obvious that we can hear. But also, like what you're saying, it contributes to the things that are unseen and unheard and whatnot. So, where does your story begin? Where do you, where were you born? Where do you come from? Where's this passion ignited for music, first of all, and then I guess into then having that ear and knowing that you have the talent to then put together this music and get people to sing this and all of that?
Yeah, I feel like that question you're asking me, if I answer it, especially the way you've kind of recontextualized it towards the end, I'm going to tell you about my experiences, not about who I am.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to tell you about who I am necessarily.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, okay, so the things that happen to us kind of filter into the people, the other things that we do. And
Yeah, of
someone
course.
can say the people we become.
Yeah.
But maybe the people we are known as. That's what I will say. But with all them, I won't get into it so much, but with all the musical interest that was there in me, I was fortunate enough to, at a certain point, which I think in my life was also like, there were many turning points, many gifts. And these turning points, I see them as gifts that God provided for me to tilt my trajectory, to lead me somewhere. And one of them, many, included or involved me meeting, Sylvester Mazan.
Yes.
So Sylvester, back in the day, although he was playing piano very early on, but he was also part of, we were in an a cappella group together.
Okay.
We sang together, and I haven't seen Sylvester in a while, but I remember those days. He was wild. He was creatively charged.
Yeah.
He was writing music, and we were young. We were in our teens. He was writing music, and he wrote one of his early compositions in church that became very famous. But it was so unusual for a young boy then to have written a real piece, He was crucified on the tree. They wouldn't let him go. Instead, they crucified my Lord. He was crucified. Something like that. So he wrote that, right? And I heard that was the first of his compositions that went very viral for what viral meant those days.
That time,
Yeah. And then I listened to that. I was like, oh man, how did you do that? So in a way, and we were a group of young guys, and most of them were very already involved in the culture, the tradition of singing, and they're very well attuned. So I joined an existing group, but before I joined, I was an observer. I was outside, and I was looking at them. I was like, my goodness, they're doing that thing that I kind of feel that I like, that I want to do, right? And then eventually when I joined them, although many of them, some of them were even related to Sylvester.
Okay.
So we were close. We were buddies. We were growing up together, right? But I remember that I drew very close to him, and we became very close. And I think I was drawn by also what he was doing, and I connected with him, to a point where when we had that group, it just became automatic for him to be the music director and for me to be the assistant director.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Because every time he would be writing a song, he would know, okay, Kgomotso, okay, here's a and I'm there, I'm ready, I'm listening, and when you're in a creative process, sometimes you want to lock into the creativity and not be worried about how people are getting it.
Yeah, sure.
So if they jump onto the work they help you work through the ideas real quick. So I connected with that, and and the guys also. The guys I were with, we really enjoyed Sylvester's compositions and arrangements. So because they were unique and they made us sound like we were unique.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So that was one of the most, I think, exciting experiences growing up.
What is the name of the group? Interested to know. What is the name?
It started out as Heavenly Stars, but then they changed the name, and Sylvester was behind the change of the name.
Okay.
And I remember how they did it those days. He was very sneaky about how he got us to change the name. But it was a smart one. A smart one.
Okay.
And he called it New Young Voices.
New Young Voices.
Yeah.
Okay. That's nice. That's catchy.
Yeah.
Like
so that's what we became.
Well, do you know what the motivation was for the name change?
I know those days already we were liking New York voices. So I suspect that the NYV came into play. And so, yeah, because he introduced New York voices to us.
Okay.
Because those days he was already a music student.
Okay.
Studying music formally, you
All
know.
right.
So he would learn in the classroom.
Yeah.
And bring some of what he's learned to us outside of the classroom.
Okay.
But yeah, so he did some really fascinating work, and it will be a mistake for me to not recognize the time and the quality of work that we did, or how that impacted me.
Yeah.
But also, what is also nice is that, like, at that time, in that era, I think, you know, when you look at especially Adventist music, there's like shifts at certain points, right?
True.
But I don't quite think that even in my thesis, like when I was studying and I was looking at these trends, I came to the 90s, and I still think there has not been a period like the 90s.
Okay.
And I wait to see if the 90s will replicate themselves somehow. They were a huge turning point, and I'm not sure whether creatively that was also reflecting what was happening socially.
Okay.
Because of, you know, in the 90s, the shift, the breaking away from formal apartheid, how that was buzzing also into how we were being creative, how we were experiencing life, and how we were feeling freedom to experiment artistically. So we'll come back to that another day. But yeah, so I mean, during those days, you know Dan Mputi, right? Who's with Emmanuel now. Yeah, so those were the guys who were already like experimenting with ideas, arranging and writing music. And then there was Gabriel Mojapelo. You know Tabiso?
Yes.
Mojapelo is
yes.
his uncle.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I think we Vusi also mentioned him when he was here. Yeah.
He had an extraordinary gift also, but also maybe the spirit of, I think creativity at its best requires boldness, even if your work is melancholy but you are boldly melancholy. Something like that.
True.
So he had that, and he wrote compositions, arranged, yes, but he wrote compositions that I think inspired compositional trends. Of course, also Boisiso Ketsa, the pastor.
Yes.
Yeah, he was already in that era. He was composing and writing. But imagine when these guys get together and they are part of one group. So they became part of the Stasa Chorale.
Yes.
And the Stasa Chorale itself was already a male voice. Imagine taking just six and then taking Legato and taking all the superstars, bringing them together into a group. So, you know, a lot of the guys we grew up and we thought, oh, this is such a singer. Oh, these inspire us. They were in the Stasa Chorale.
Sure.
It was a huge male voice. So imagine that, and then with composers like that who were changing the landscape, who were bold enough to write new music. But I want to also recommend the leadership of Mokale Kwapeng. Because I think as a music director, he was also very central in creating an environment that gave those creators the confidence to do what they did, and was able to direct their music so well that, you know, it changed the landscape. And some of those singers who were singing there made their music come alive, right? So
It must have been a very hard job for him.
Yeah,
so
no.
much creativity, all these arrangers
no,
and
in fact, I
composers.
think he's done it so phenomenally well because later on also the Bheka Dlamini is, I don't want to say the Fisane of that time,
Okay.
but you could say that a little bit. Although I see them, I think artistically they sit at different points. It's just that maybe they have their origins in KZN.
Okay.
But Bheka, it's almost like Fisane represents the KZN, the township KZN, with his compositions, the gospel township community singing of KZN, right? But when you listen to what Bheka, for instance, does, his artistic works represent rural KZN.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not even mambazo. It's almost like the kind of thing that can be understood through mambazo,
Okay.
but has its own vein, right? So imagine back in those days, already they had a Bheka, they had a Cap, they had a Soketsa, they had a Mokale himself, which created such a rich environment for a variety of compositional styles and compositions. That made that era so buzzing. So we drew our inspiration from the Stasa Chorale.
Sure.
JOVA. The JOVA Podcast.